just wanted to see if you guys were getting my shot.
We do have fire investigators on scene. Once we're able to enter the hazard zone to investigate the cause and origin of this fire, crews are doing a great job to make sure that this does not spread to neighboring businesses, and we're taking a layered approach to make sure that our crews have enough opportunities to recycle and rehab in this extreme temperature. Any questions?
We know that we were over just a few streets over, and we were told that there was a very big concern about the fire spreading. We're seeing some people come out and be concerned at the smoke.
Yeah.
What is your message to them, and are you concerned that the fire can spread?
Absolutely. So at this time, if you're far enough away from the fire with this type of heat, it's important for people to remember to just shelter in place. If we need you to evacuate, we will let you know. At this time, people are self-evacuating, and that's fine if that's what they choose to do, but we encourage them to stay in an air-conditioned environment. Obviously, with smoke like this, embers can travel, so we're going to do the best we can to mitigate any form of spot fires that might turn up. At this time, we don't have any reports of any other structures on fire, and crews are doing a good job to monitor the area with the patrol to make sure that we don't have any other structure fires happen.
And you know the cause. Where did this originate from? Do you guys have any idea?
So the initial reports was that a propane business had propane tanks that were on fire and that they were burning. Why they started on fire, we don't know. And our investigators with the Phoenix Fire Investigations Task Force will do a great job to verify where and how they started on fire.
Can you talk a little bit about the dangers of those propane tanks exploding? Is there a concern that they
Absolutely.
fall on people,
Absolutely.
homes or cars, damage any other
Yeah,
property?
so we have evidence of propane tanks up to 500 yards past the ground zero where this is actually happening. So there's absolutely a concern. Our partners with Phoenix PD are doing a great job to make sure that they keep everybody out of the immediate hazard zone and the nearby area. They're using caution and hazard tape as well as securing the streets to make sure that we don't have any of these propane tanks land on anybody and nobody gets hurt.
With so many propane tanks, obviously they're exploding. Can you walk us through what the next 3 to 6 hours may look like? Is this going to be an intense
Sure.
firefight?
So what happens with these types of propane tanks is they have a bleeder valve. That allows, when they catch on fire, to bleed until all of the propane actually exits the bottle. The challenge here is we have very, very large, probably 400 or 500 gallon propane tanks as well that we use to fill these types of things. So we need to let those bleed out. And the concern, obviously, we don't want those to get so hot that they would explode. As long as they're venting with the fire, then they're safe. And we're doing a good job of keeping the containers cool with ladder trucks, as you can see, spraying water on those large propane tanks as well as on the structure just to the north that's on fire.
Is it possible, with the extreme temperatures that we're having right now, is it possible, I know that you guys are still investigating, that heat could have played a factor in sparking?
At this time, it's too early to tell. These types of fires can start any time of year, so we really don't know. It wouldn't be safe for me to say. People have propane tanks in this type of heat all day, every day in the city of Phoenix. So we don't know that that's what caused it. We do know that the heat is playing a factor on the resources that are here, the people that live in the community, and so we do want to make sure that our firefighters are getting enough rest, water, recycle, and rehab throughout this incident, and making sure that the people as well are staying safe and out of the hazard zone.
We know that the Arizona Animal Welfare League is in the path of this. We've heard, thank goodness, that they've reported they evacuated all the animals,
Yeah.
which is great. What can you tell us about the parking? There's like a business that people park temporarily and go to the airport.
Yeah.
A lot of cars are there. Do you know anything about that?
So at this time, when I left the scene, we did have a parking lot that the airport uses for traffic to their facility. There was smoke that was passing over those cars. I don't have any information on that at this time. Hopefully it's just smoke and it passes by those vehicles. I did not see any vehicles on fire when I was over there.
When we're hearing those bangs, is it one of these
Yeah.
exploding? And then that could possibly send shrapnel, things like that.
Yeah,
out.
so as you see here, this tank blevied, so it exploded, and this is where it ruptured, right? So we have hundreds of these scattered around the area, as well as very, very large ones. So there's several that are in pieces over there. So absolutely shrapnel is a concern, hence the over exaggeration on our part to make sure that everybody's out of the area and safe.
And just so I'm understanding, there you said hundreds of those bigger tanks. Are the bigger tanks a big concern if they catch fire? Have they caught fire?
They're burning right now. Yeah, we have
Okay.
at least 2 that I saw that were burning. So, but they are off-gassing. So as long as the fire is coming out of that bleeder valve, then we're not concerned that it's going to explode because we have water on it keeping the tank cool. So everything is going as to plan in a situation like this from our side. Now we just want to make sure that we get all of the fuel out of all of these tanks before we can go in and evaluate the scene.
We were hearing that those bigger tanks may have been as full as about 70%.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never been to this facility, so I don't know how full they were. I haven't spoken with any of the responsible parties for the business yet, but our investigators are speaking with them, so they'd have more details as far as how much fuel it could have. They could have been up to 100% for all we know. So we just need to give them time to bleed off.
How long could it take to bleed off those big
It could definitely be hours. Yeah, we could be here for several hours tonight. This might be a long campaign fire that we're going to be out here on. Phoenix Fire is obviously very comfortable with things like this. We do this every day in the city of Phoenix, especially in the summer months when things get really hot. So we're prepared to handle this incident and taking a very safe approach to make sure that everybody's safe. Did you have a question?
Yes. Any concern with the air quality? I know propane is something that people want to bring here.
Well, as of now, the propane's burning off, and so right now we do have smoke that's burning. So I would caution everyone to stay out of the smoke, because the smoke is a toxic fume, and we want to make sure that people aren't getting that in their skin, breathing it in. Stay indoors if you're anywhere near that smoke.
We saw Tempe was here. What else? What are other agencies are here?
Absolutely. So we've got a great mutual aid partnership with the surrounding cities. So Tempe, Guadalupe. We might have trucks from Mesa. I'm not even sure. Scottsdale might be here. So all of our surrounding partners we work really well with. It's basically like one big fire department, and just to make sure that we work as a team to make sure that this goes out. We train together. We work big fires like this together, so it's like a handshake basis, first name basis when we're dealing with stuff like this. Everybody knows each other, and we know what to do.
Captain, you mentioned the air quality issue. The wind is kind of shifting every once in a while. What is that radius that we can tell people if you're in this vicinity or this
I'd
area?
say if you were within 5 miles of 40th Street in Van Buren, be advised you could be dealing with some potential smoke in your area. Just try to stay out of that.
I was speaking with at least one person and not get back to their phone. What would you tell those people? They're probably not going to get back anytime soon.
Sure. So at this time, if the command officers on scene have deemed that house is unsafe, then they won't let them back in. Most likely, this fire is going to be put out now. Crews are already starting to get a handle on. As you can see, you see gray and white smoke. That means they're getting water on the structure itself. So that structure is beginning to go out. So I imagine as soon as the structure's out and these propane tanks are all managed, then we won't. Those people will be able to go home.
I'm not sure if you already answered this, but how many fire trucks and staff are out on the scene right now?
So before we started this interview, we were at a second alarm. So we're expecting approximately 100 firefighters here, probably upwards of 30 to 40 different fire trucks and different apparatus. We do have a command van staged behind me with command officers from Phoenix Fire, Phoenix PD, and any of the important local stakeholders that would need to be a part of this. And we're going to work with the city officials to make sure that, like we talked about, air quality, any runoff from water, things along those lines are all going to be mitigated and handled in the most appropriate way.
We're still seeing planes take off and land behind us at Sky Harbor. I know that would be up to them, but any update on that? Nothing has changed.
Absolutely, yeah. So Phoenix Sky Harbor has their own PIO, so they're going to go ahead and answer that. We've reached out to them. We've made contact with them. They understand the situation. So at this time, I haven't gotten any updates as far as what their procedures are going to be moving forward. But I would encourage you to reach out to their PIO, and they can answer any of those questions.
Captain, you may have answered this. Obviously, 115 degrees. For people not living in Phoenix that aren't familiar with what happens here just about every summer, is this the first big fire incident? Can we expect more? Can you kind of break down where we're at when it comes to these kind of commercial fires?
Yeah, absolutely not our first one this summer. Speaking of people that maybe have moved here, we do have a lot of transplant folks that have moved here from out of state, people that might be spending their first summer or second summer in the city of Phoenix. Well, this is hot, and they're starting to see what happens. So big fires like this are definitely going to happen occasionally throughout the city, and we encourage everybody to manage your hydration, stay out of the heat. If you're going to be out working, people that just moved here, if you're going to be outside, do it in the early morning hours or in the later evening hours. Drink plenty of water, wear appropriate clothing as far as just a safety message. But yeah, we anticipate this is going to be a hot summer for a lot of people that are spending their first time here.
For more of a technical question about the business, do you know if the main line was buried, or do you know if it was...
I don't know. My guess is it would be buried. Most of those propane lines are, but I don't know for sure. I haven't been able to get to the hazard zone and see it yet. When I got close, it was so loud that the hissing and the heat, I wasn't able to get within 200 yards of the fire. So
how hot does a suit get inside when a firefighter
so
is wearing
our turnouts Yeah, I'm not sure exactly the exact temperature. I know that we do need to manage our work rest cycles though, because guys can get overheated pretty quickly, and our gals as well. So it's important that we make sure that our crews work for maybe 20 minutes, go through a bottle of air, then they come out, get some water if they need an IV. We check their temperatures. We make sure we monitor their vital signs as well to make sure that nobody's overheating and we don't have to send anybody to the hospital.
Is that why we have agencies from different cities coming in to help? Because there are crews that need to be recycled that need that time.
Absolutely, yeah. The multi-layered response is the answer to a problem like this. One crew or even 5 crews couldn't do this. We need to make sure that we have lots of people coming in and out, and making sure that we have all of the areas surrounded to make sure that this fire doesn't spread. Anybody else? Any questions? You want to do it in Espanol? Or no?
Yeah.
Or are you good? Okay.
Thank you.
Just right here? Stay here? Or up there?
Okay, you've been listening live to Phoenix Fire, giving us a debrief on this propane fire that has been burning now for since 4:51 this afternoon. They got the first 911 call that there was a fire at Bill's Propane. It's a propane warehouse that also refills propane tanks on property, and they're telling us now that they're seeing hundreds of propane tanks that have been shot off like missiles because they got superheated with that compressed gas. In fact, let's go ahead and take a look at this picture that Captain Rob McDade texted me just moments ago. This landed far across the street. It shot way across the street to where he was staged at with other fire crews that were kind of staging at a safer distance when this came flying across the street, landing in the gravel there. And that's one of those propane tanks. Can you imagine something like that just being shot off? And they said there are hundreds of these, and they're worried about the shrapnel that's exploding from this fire.
Right, because this is a piece of that tank, and he, while he was speaking there, held up a tank which had only partially exploded. He said, in addition to the tanks, you said shrapnel, hundreds of them, and they're finding these 500 yards away.
Crazy.
Sometimes you're like, well, did you mean feet or yards? He said yards twice. So 5 football fields away from this propane business, they are finding exploded tanks and shrapnel from those tanks as well. Some other information that they were able to pass along to us during that briefing there: no injuries reported at this scene. We do know at least one person was working at the propane business when the fire broke out in the 4 o'clock hour. So no injuries reported as of yet. No word on a cause. They say there is a gas line that goes into that property, though they haven't been able, of course, to get into it to check it out. He said it wasn't clear if the gas line is buried or above ground. But on the property, they have a couple of those huge tanks, propane tanks, 400, 500 gallon tanks, along with the hundreds of much smaller tanks which were there to be filled. And they are spraying water on those large tanks to keep them cool as the gas kind of bleeds out and burns, and that's creating the smoke that you're seeing here at this live picture.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we had that other vantage point where you could see the active flame and we're like, gosh, they could just keep dousing it, and
Yep.
it is not dying down at all. He said that's by design.
Right.
They have what's called a bleeder valve on those huge tanks, so it kind of reduces the pressure, if you will. So when it's dealing, if they didn't have that bleeder valve, that would be a massive explosion of 400 to 500 gallon tanks of compressed gas that they're dealing with there. So at least they're dealing with that and just kind of keeping water on it until it eventually bleeds out all that source of fuel.
I just want to get to a little bit more information that we just learned. So you're seeing the smoke plume there from that thick, large cloud of black smoke. There's some gray and white smoke mixed in there. He said that is because the building on site, which has been burning, the flames, at least on that building, appear to be going out, which is creating the white smoke there. But the fuel continues to burn, and that's why they're still dousing the large tanks on site with water. A couple other things he was able to pass along. Crews there, about 100 firefighters on scene, because it is so hot, even after 6 o'clock at night, well into the triple digits, on another record-breaking day here in the valley. So they're recycling crews out. Phoenix firefighters, Scottsdale firefighters, Guadalupe, Mesa, Tempe, they've all sent crews here to this hazmat scene tonight. We were wondering about the other buildings surrounding this property. The Animal Welfare League, just south of there, they say that is safe. The flames did not spread there. No embers landed on that and ignited it. None of the other buildings surrounded this property have been set on fire. And no cars in any of the airport parking lots adjacent to this property have been set on fire as well, which is a good news and a testament to the hard work that they've been doing there tonight in a defensive posture fighting this fire.
I just have to say it is a sheer blessing that none of these propane tanks, hundreds of them shooting off 500 yards like a missile, landing in gravel 500 yards away from, he called it ground zero, where they're dealing with this intense propane fire, that it hasn't hit anyone, that it hasn't caused secondary fires, that there have, at this point, knock on wood, been no reports of any injuries. We want to get you more information and background on this warehouse that we're learning about, Bill's Propane. Amy Cutler, our investigator, live in the newsroom, and you've been kind of digging into what you can learn about what's going on at that facility. Amy.
Yeah, we checked in with the Arizona Corporation Commission, and we have now learned that they kind of inspect these propane companies. They oversee and regulate propane systems that are public utilities. At this point, we haven't been able to find any violations or issues with that, but we also want to show you some viewer video now. Some of the most incredible video coming out of this was some viewer video that kind of showed those tall towers of flames. And we wanted to look into that. We wanted to get an idea of what was behind that. And we learned that it is likely due to flaring devices on the propane tanks, which the Phoenix Fire Department addressed during that press conference. And it's really the result of those pressure relief valves that allow gas to escape if too much pressure builds up. So this is a safety relief mechanism, is what we have learned, designed to vent propane in the event that pressure builds. For example, if the heat rises very suddenly to an extreme temperature, in this case a fire. So Phoenix Fire addressing that, saying that they are putting water on the tanks to keep the temperature down to prevent any kind of explosions of these larger tanks. So that's the good news. A spring, we have also learned, inside the valve is designed to release if the pressure inside that tank builds to a certain level. So at which point the valve will open slightly and start to hiss. So a lot of background on these propane tanks, but really worth taking a closer look at given the scale of this fire and where this is coming from at this point. And we've also learned into this looked into the research and found that if the pressure rises excessively, the valve will open completely. The relief valve allows pressure to be released quickly and safely. So a lot of detailed information here, but the towers of flames and smoke coming from this fire initially were really incredible to see. And so we wanted to get an idea of what was behind that. So it is good news, Phoenix Fire keeping a close eye on this. Again, they have plans in place and a strategy in which they are using to address this fire, and they're making some progress. So that's the good news. And we're going to keep on top of this and work to learn more about the fire, and we'll keep you posted. Nicole, Jared?
Amy, thank you. That's super helpful, and I don't want to oversimplify it or extrapolate too much, but when I see the fire that just keeps burning with great intensity and the firefighters dousing it with water, it almost makes me think of those oil rig fires. And they just, the way that they've explained this today is that they're letting that bleeder valve continue to kind of slowly leak out the fuel, and hopefully eventually, unknown amount of time, it will dissipate that fuel that is just continuing to burn. So that's why he said we're at a good spot right now. Now, hopefully, it won't spread to any more of those smaller propane tanks that will go shooting off like missiles.
And you could still see on the right-hand side of the screen there the fuel still bleeding out of those tanks. I don't want to say in a controlled way, but in a somewhat controlled way, which they are handling.
It's doing what they expect.
Exactly. They're making progress, they said. And I do want to add to what Amy was saying about Bill's Propane Service. They've been around for almost 50 years. So they're an established company here in the Valley, and that is where this is happening tonight. So we do have crews on scene, keeping a safe distance, as was that firefighter who was giving us the briefing a short time ago. Sarah Robinson standing by live for us. Sarah, where did you end up, and what can you see what's going on at your vantage point?
Jared, I can. Right now they have us on 40th Street and Fillmore, and from where I am standing, I'm about a mile away. You can still see these fire crews with multiple hoses trying to get this fire out. And of course, as we were on the way here, the smoke was much thicker and darker than it is now, which fire is saying is a very good sign. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about why this was such a dangerous fire. Obviously, propane is a very gaseous substance. It can explode, and fire crews were telling us that these propane tanks, under the right pressure, in the right conditions, they basically become miniature bombs or missiles that can go up to 500 feet in the air. Obviously, that is super dangerous for those fire crews. That's why they have them pretty far away. And they say they have been able to do this in a very safe manner. They have about 100 firefighters on the ground here. They have to rotate them out in about 20-minute increments. It is 115, I believe, about right now, or at least it was when they got here, which is obviously very, very hot. So they're making them take breaks every 20 minutes to make sure that everyone stays safe. Another very important detail, miraculously, there were no injuries, which they're saying is a very, very good thing, considering the large fire that this was and how many moving parts and elements that added to the danger of a fire of this magnitude. They are saying that they're able to slowly release pressure from some of these propane tanks, and that is allowing them to keep the fire under control in a safe manner. Now, one thing that I did ask them about is the air quality, since propane is a substance that we don't want to be breathing in. They say it does burn off very quickly, so they're not worried about the air quality in the area from the propane, but they are worried about the air quality in the area from the large amount of smoke. So they're encouraging people to shelter in place for now because of the large amount of smoke that is in the area. We also know that there were several homes that were recommended to evacuate. We see people walking the streets now just to try to get a little bit of a distance away from the fire should anything happen, but the majority of people were able to stay. There is also an animal shelter nearby. We know that all of those animals, thankfully, have been evacuated safely. This fire, they say, is going to continue to burn for at least the next several hours. So, of course, as soon as we get more information, or as soon as this fire is completely under control, we will keep you updated both on air and online. Jared and Nicole, I'll send it back to you guys. Reporting live in Phoenix, I'm Sarah Robinson for Arizona's Family.
Sarah, thank you. And we've got a new viewer video that's coming in of one of those explosions. You could see the intense flames that are out there. And I know we've been watching just the fire as it's been shooting off into the sky. I mean, that looks like a pretty crazy fire here. We're getting more videos that are coming in. Okay, here's another shot from a different vantage point. So many viewer videos are starting to cycle in, and it looks like people who, maybe pulled over, they saw what was going on, pulled over. Thank goodness it looks like they kept a safe distance at least.
This got very big very quickly.
Fast.
Based on the viewer videos which are coming into us, many of which appear to have been recorded before a lot of fire crews and police officers arrived on scene there and cleared them out. There's one of the tanks
in a parking lot.
And they say this is what you are going to find all over that area. I mean, it's not being overly dramatic to use the terminology. Do you hear those pops? To use the terminology that the firefighters used, comparing them to missiles launching 500 yards, one after another.
I know. We're like with bated breath. We're watching this with you, so we appreciate your patience in this. But yeah, I was like, if we re-rack this, am I hearing pops? Is that what we're hearing here? It's pretty wild to see. I mean, and when you see that, you just imagine what's outside in your backyard at your grill. That comes shooting across. Yeah, you absolutely hear those explosions. Dang.
Just listen for a second. Yeah, it is just amazing. It's absolutely amazing to watch this unfold. And the initial call was several tanks, multiple tanks are on fire, burning right now. That was the initial call made into the fire department tonight. Multiple tanks on fire, and it spread very quickly from there.
Yeah, since the top of the 5 o'clock hour, now they're confirming hundreds of those propane tanks have been shot off, and they're showing up in a 1 mile radius. That's what they've shut down the neighborhood and trying to close off the area to keep people safe. So I've done a little bit of math here. I've got like a Tetris situation going on my little scrappy notes here, but from 4:50 to now just past 6:30, that is 5 fire rotations. So they've got crews out there. They're calling this a second alarm fire with 100 firefighters, 30 to 40 trucks and engines out there. They do have a command van, and then they've got teams from different jurisdictions coming in to help them. So he's talked about, like, you know, how hot it is for them to wear full turnout gear, and then they're using their SCBAs to keep the firefighters breathing clean air, because they don't want to be taking in that air as they're up there. Look at this guy on the ladder here. I mean, that air, that smoke is just burying at them. I mean, that's terrible. So yeah, they're wanting to make sure that they're staying safe out there. So they've done at a minimum 5 rotations at this point in 20-minute increments, trying to switch out those crews to make sure, 1, that they're staying hydrated, and 2, that they're getting fresh folks on the front lines to get this fire out.
And over the last 90 minutes since we first came on air to cover this, we have seen, I think now there are 4 ladder trucks surrounding this fire. And as we've been talking about, really all they can do is douse the tanks on site with water, trying to keep the tanks as cool as possible while the gas inside bleeds out. Royal, I know you've seen a number of these different kind of unique fires here in the valley over the years. What sticks out in your mind as you watch this unfold?
Yeah, I think what you guys are saying, just the explosive force, the number of propane tanks, and how quickly the fire got going, as we all watched live. The other thing is that it's a very hot fire. Propane can burn up to 3,500 degrees. So that's why we see this explosive force in some of those tanks nearby. Now, we were talking about air quality. I want to paint a little bit of good news into there. We don't have any air quality issues in and around the fire. Now, with the exception of there could be within a block or two, we're not saying that, but we do have some ADEQ air quality gauges that are in and around that vicinity, and we have no air quality issues. In fact, the closest air quality gauge is at 2800 North Miller Road, South Scottsdale, and it is showing good air quality at this point. The particulates, which is the smoke, is very low. So what's happened is the wind kept the smoke leaving the scene, and we got a little vertical development in that smoke, and so it left the scene. And so we're keeping our fingers crossed the air quality will stay good. Let me just update you on the weather. It just got updated at Gateway Community College. There's a weather station, so that's right across the street.
Yeah.
It's 114. The wind's out of the southwest at 8. The latest wind gust was at 15 miles an hour, and we'll expect those winds to probably stay in that range, though, as you've been mentioning, firefighters seem to have a little bit of a handle on this, but it doesn't look like wind is going to be a factor, except for the fact that it's going to take this smoke away, keep it low level for a bit before it gets elevated.
The other thing, Royal, that we wanted to kind of pick your brain on, because we're talking about, 119. I know it's 114 there now, but when we talk about the peak heat of the day, and Captain Rob McDade was like, I'm not 100% sure at what heat level a propane tank without any other ignition point can catch fire, if it's ambient heat or other things like that. Clearly, these other ones are shooting off like rockets are because of the active fire that's burning. But as to what caused the initial fire, that'd be a big stretch to think that there's a possibility that, we all have propane tanks in our backyard. That's not a very likely probability.
Well, it doesn't seem to be. We've been doing a little bit of research on this. Not a propane expert, but we found that the ignition of propane, you've got to have between, a little bit more than 900 degrees to 1,000 degrees. That's the point that propane will spontaneously ignite. The comparison is gasoline can ignite as low as 80 degrees, but usually in a range up to 300 degrees. So gasoline is a lot more likely, let's say, to spontaneously combust than propane. So yeah, we don't know what happened out there. The other thing I was able to do is look at a bunch of reports from the NTSB on propane accidents. And what happens in a lot of these, and again, we're not getting ahead of ourselves, but some sort of transfer process is going on. Propane in, propane on, moving into another area of the farm. that kind of thing. We don't, what I'm looking through the records, didn't see a lot of there's nothing going on and the propane just started on fire.
Keep this picture up here, folks, because this blows my mind to see this crumpled, burnt out shell of a propane tank that got shot across from the building, from the warehouse, shot across the street into a parking lot, boom, lands up, crumpled like that, like it's nothing. You think of how solid a propane tank is. I mean, they're sturdy.
Very heavy.
And to have it just reduced to this shell, this ashen shell, it really kind of paints an important picture for you about the power and intensity of the heat of this fire.
And we don't know how far away the firefighter was when he picked this up or when he took this photo, but we do know the other firefighter who gave us the briefing a short time ago, he said he couldn't get within 200 yards of the fire. So this was at least 200 yards away from the point of origin at this fire there.
You know, I'm a griller, and you know how heavy those tanks are, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've taken my back out carrying these things before. So imagine the force and those tanks flying through the air and some of the damage it can cause to nearby cars. And that's probably very easily why they cleared the whole area out.
Yeah, I mean, Gateway Community College, right across the street there, that was evacuated. But it has been impressive that nothing else has burned. I mean, this fire didn't spread to any of the neighboring buildings. I mean, you have to think that one of these tanks might have landed on a car in one of those parking lots somewhere along the way, but no reports of any injuries there. And the flames didn't spread. The embers carried away, didn't light anything else on fire either. And I did, Nicole, as you were checking your notes there, I did see one of the ladder crews switch out. We saw one firefighter go down, one firefighter go up. So just as you were talking about, they are switching out pretty rapidly because it is still just brutally hot out there at this fire scene, and they're just right out there in the elements. You know, there's no shade. They're not covered by anything, especially the guys up in the ladders dousing that fire.
Heavens for all those first responders. You just saw a fleet of Phoenix PD squad cars out there with their lights on, kind of maintaining the perimeter to keep folks safe. I mean, people, like they said, want to get as close as they can to the action. Everybody's going to put it on YouTube, TikTok, you name it. But they want to keep people safe, so they've got those Phoenix police officers staged at a safe perimeter, and even those police officers, they're in full gear, they're in their body vests, and that's miserable to be out in this heat as well. So you're looking at a live picture here, and it does look as though that smoke cloud has dissipated a bit. Again, it might just be from the vantage point that we're seeing here off to the right, where it looks like the ladder is still dousing it quite significantly. It's been a nonstop stream of water that they're just kind of throwing at this thing to try to cool it down, because they don't anticipate the fire to be put out until the fuel is out, till the fuel is dissipated. And they're doing that thing where he explained it as bleeding out. Right. The fuel source at this point. It's a massive tank, up to 500 gallons. Yeah. That's pretty significant. A couple of them. Yeah, a couple of them. So it's kind of impossible to quantify how many hours that could be. I'm not even sure of that. I've had propane tanks at my campfire that They last for quite a while, and that's a tiny little propane tank. So a 500 gallon, man, this could be a doozy.
He said this will likely take several hours to burn, and then from there, you have the whole hazmat scene to deal with to make sure it's safe. I was just getting a message from someone I know across the street at Gateway Community College. They said initially the room shook, the windows shook, and as they were being evacuated driving away, and those tanks continued to explode, he said he could actually feel his car shake as he was driving down the street, all too close to that fire. Much of the smoke is gone now because the building on site, which was burning, has now either burned out or the flames are at least out. So that's why we're not seeing so much of that thick black smoke. But that fuel source or sources continue to bleed there as they continue to douse the tanks with water. Again, we do have crews. As we were watching the briefing from the firefighter earlier, that was half a mile north. So they are keeping everybody quite a safe distance away from this site as well. Elliot Polikoff is out there, has been on scene in the heat for us for a while. Elliot, what's going on from your vantage point?
Yeah, Jared, you mentioned you just spoke with some people from Gateway Community College. We just spoke with some people that work there as well, and they were still trying to get their car. As you can see, there's still a lot of crews still on scene, a lot of water being sprayed on that building. Actually did see a few flames within the last 15 minutes, but nothing that was huge. On the other side of where all of this water is, I don't know if you can see that white building off in the distance. That is where the Arizona Animal Welfare League is. We aren't able to get close to that point, but like I said, I spoke with some people over at Gateway Community College, and they were just doing up the end of their workday, and they heard loud booms, and they just knew something was going crazy. They showed me some pictures of the initial stages of this fire, and it was just basically a huge orange fireball surrounding this building. And then they, like you said, Jared, they heard the building shake. They are still trying to get their cars. At this point, it seems like they might have to wait until maybe tomorrow, so they're having their families come and pick them up, but they are just grateful that it didn't get closer to where they were at the community college. But as you can see, a heavy fire presence out here. They're going to be here for a while, it looks like, as you mentioned, Jared, but we'll be sure to keep you updated when we learn any new information.
Elliot, thank you. Let's keep your live picture up for just a second if we can, because Paul just noted that the firefighters are much closer now than we have seen them as we've watched this play out for almost 2 hours here. That is, I guess, one of the buildings on site at this propane business, Bill's Propane Services, which has been around here in the Valley for about 50 years, according to state records. One of the buildings there that burned. According to firefighters, at this point, there are no reports of any injuries. We do know at least one person was at this site working and made the initial call saying several tanks were on fire, and then it grew very quickly from there. But the buildings around this are fine. Nothing has burned around it. Operations at Sky Harbor Airport have not been affected this evening. The light rail is affected. They're offloading people heading from downtown Phoenix to the East Valley, I believe at 28th Street and Jefferson. That's as far east as you can go on the light rail, but they'll bus you around this if you're heading out to the East Valley this evening. Gateway Community College remains evacuated. Elliot mentioned that, and you cannot get in this area. They're asking people not to go take a look at what's going on because it's still very dangerous down there. The smoke is toxic, so stay away from 40th Street in Washington.
Yeah, Valley Metro even dispatched shuttle buses out there for folks who could not get any further on their route and needed to find a safe way to get to a bus or other public transportation instead. But this is a great vantage point. It really gives you a good look at those firefighters trying to attack this from all angles and come at this to kind of cool down the warehouse out there where they've got hundreds of propane tanks, and it'd be curious to see if there's another stash of propane tanks, in a different part of the warehouse that, but I can't imagine that because they said that the structure was on fire. Right. So we know that it spread to the entire warehouse, as you can imagine it would with the propane tanks shooting off. So perhaps, I'm going to knock on wood that all of those smaller propane tanks have been, already done what they're going to do, and maybe it's safe enough for these firefighters to get a little bit closer if they're dealing with just those huge 400, 500 gallon tanks at this point, that they know that's a source that is safely bleeding out flame, that they can just keep it cooled down.
And they don't take risks in a situation like this, but you could see that's the first time I've seen firefighters actually walk onto this property. So they must feel safe enough to walk onto the property this evening for the first time, I guess, really, to get a first-hand view of what exactly is still there, because they had no idea how many tanks
Isn't that something?
are there, and there they go into the scene to just sort of see, I guess, what they're dealing with. I guess the crews up in the ladder, the guys in the ladder, had a bird's eye view.
Sure.
But there they go on the ground just to kind of survey the inside there of that property.
Yeah, you could see quite a bit of flames still coming off, and that's the height of the structure, just to give you a vantage point of that. Sarah Robinson, let's go ahead and check in live with her once again from a different area on the scene. We've got multiple crews out there to make sure that you get the best coverage from every angle. Sarah, what's going on where you are now?
You guys really just said it best. This scene is looking a lot better than it was when we first got here. I want to show you exactly what we are seeing now. For the first time, we are actually seeing some fire crews approach the scene, approach the property. But you can still see them hitting this fire from several different angles, full force with those hoses and in those towers. This scene, much better than it was when we were approaching the highway. We could see a really thick plume of dark black smoke that was visible from miles away. Fire crews have said tonight that they were able to get this mostly under control, but I want to mention just how dangerous this situation was. Earlier, they had about every minute or every second, they were saying multiple propane tanks shooting up into the air. They compared them to pressurized missiles, to bombs. That made for a very dangerous situation for Phoenix fire crews to walk into and to try to battle those flames. We do know that there are 100 firefighters, or over 100 firefighters, boots on the ground here from multiple different units. We also know that Tempe is here. There were no injuries, so that is a good sign. We are seeing people poke their heads out of their houses. You can see that this is a residential area back in here. I am on 40th Street and Fillmore. We're about a mile or so from the scene in a safe location, but there were some evacuations ordered. There was an animal hospital just a bit away from here. That was fully evacuated. All of those animals were able to get off safely. There's also a college nearby that was evacuated. They were also able to get out safely. We do know that Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport was able to continue their flights despite this being in a pretty close proximity. You can still see the planes coming and going here tonight. So they say that this is going to take a while to get completely under control. They are letting the propane burn out. They say that that happens pretty rapidly, so they are anticipating that this is going to be out by later tonight. We don't have an official time estimate, but of course we will be here through the night and keep you updated both on air and online. I'll send it back to you guys. Reporting live in Phoenix, I'm Sarah Robinson for Arizona's Family.
Thank you, Sarah. And as the sun sets on this Thursday evening, we're going to give you another live look from the scene out here. This fire has now been burning more than 2 hours out here with quite a bit of fuel left to go at Bill's Propane Services, 40th Street in Washington. It is pretty remarkable. As she mentioned, it's so close to the airport. In some of the shots, we could see the control tower and the tarmac. And at one point, there was concerns with they were going to have to shut down the northern tarmac because of the smoke impacting visibility for those pilots. It has dissipated significantly, and we're starting to see that white smoke as the structure starts to cool off, and just that the actual larger tanks remain on fire at this point.
Yeah, airport operations are normal this evening, and if you've been watching our coverage tonight, we've mentioned a number of times that this is the area where a lot of people park their cars. The off-site airport parking is all up and down 40th Street there. And this propane business is just kind of sandwiched right among those parking lots, just north of the Animal Welfare League, which was, I believe, at least partially evacuated, or at least maybe their animal hospital portion was evacuated there this evening. It really is remarkable that there are no reports of any injuries, because this was so explosive right off the top, and so burning so out of control for so long. It's just remarkable that no one was injured as we watched that unfold earlier, because this looks so much better than it did even just an hour ago.
Can you imagine dodging one of those propane tanks, seeing them, or actively seeing them shooting off? I mean, like bottle rockets, but you're talking about like a large, put your arm around the circumference of those propane tanks that you see in your backyard grill. Those are shooting 5 football field lengths from this building across to unsuspecting parking lots, businesses. It doesn't appear that there have been any injuries. Thank goodness. They're still, of course, in the area, and once they get that fire out, then they'll move out into the outskirts of the neighborhood and just, start collecting those and seeing if there were any, subsequent damages that they might have to be looking at. And you see this tree branch in the foreground. Royal, the wind hasn't contributed significantly to this.
It hasn't, but the good news about the wind was it took that smoke off site.
That's
and
good.
We haven't had any super air quality issues off-site. Now, firefighters have been talking about right around there, the smoke could be an issue in that neighborhood, but it's been lifted out of the area and it's been dispersed, and we've been checking ADEQ sites, and there are no issues right now with air quality. The latest wind, though, is interesting. It has picked up there. It's out of the southwest at 13 miles an hour now, with gusts to 15 miles an hour. So it's picked up a little bit. It hasn't been much of a factor. The big factor is still the heat. That temperature gauge at Gateway College is at 114. It's just amazing those firefighters doing what they're doing in this kind of heat.
Now you can see from this vantage point, one just standing kind of looking over and assessing the damages. We did see in the last 5 minutes a group of about 3 or 4 firefighters, it appeared, to walk past those fire engines and into the property to get a better look at what they're dealing with out there.
They must seem to think that the most severe threat has at least passed. You know, maybe they have a bird's eye view of the interior of that property and deemed it safe enough for several of the firefighters to walk in there on the ground to check things out. If you're just getting home and joining us, what they're doing now, because it appears the building is no longer burning, there's no longer a huge plume of black smoke being sent up, but you still, I believe, you can still see flames through the windows there, and that is because they're kind of letting the fuel remaining in those giant tanks continue to bleed in somewhat of a controlled way as they continue to douse the tanks, keep the tanks themselves cool enough so they don't explode, Royal.
Yeah, and one of the properties with propane that I am familiar with is propane is actually heavier than air, so it sinks. So if there was any propane, let's say, getting out pre this ignition, well, it was staying near the ground, and that's the same thing with your home propane. If you've got a propane tank leaking, that propane is going to stay near the ground. That's the opposite of natural gas. Natural gas will tend to rise very quickly. So that's one of the things with propane that will be interesting to see how this factored in tonight in this firefight.
I didn't know that, but what's interesting that you mentioned that is in some of the viewer videos we've seen, there's been a lot of flame very close to the ground. It seemed to spread out, and it was hard to tell what exactly was burning at the time in addition to the building. Yeah,
it does hug the ground. Propane does, it is heavier than air.
From explosive shrapnel and propane tanks shooting off like missiles, Phoenix Fire says this is the most volatile, dangerous fire kind of scenario that they could be dealing with, not to mention in 119-degree temps. As we zoom in and kind of push in on this fire, you could see flames still at the height of the structure here.
Than 2 hours ago. They've made quite a bit of progress, but still a major fire they're burning that they have to deal with this evening.
We are going to continue our live coverage on AZ Family News app, our website, YouTube, and Smart TV. .40th Street in Washington, right by Sky Harbor Airport.
Yeah, I believe you've been mentioning the first call in to 911 was made right around 4:51 this afternoon by someone who was working there on site, saying multiple tanks were burning, and from there it just continued to burn out of control, sending those tanks just exploding through this neighborhood. So if you're just joining us, we're going to recap the information we do know confirmed by firefighters over the course of this evening as we've watched this fire burn. Importantly, we always start with injuries. No confirmed injuries at this fire scene today. That is the good news. At least one person working there at the site was not injured, according to firefighters, and no one else in this community injured as far as they know. No word yet on a cause. What caused this fire? What caused it to initially ignite this afternoon? We have fire crews on scene, 100 firefighters from several different fire agencies all over the valley arriving there, due in large part to A, the hazmat situation, and B, the extreme heat there. Because they have to cycle in, cycle out, because they can only be on for maybe 20 to 30 minutes at a time before they have to come down from the ladders, come back to a cooling center and cool down and kind of regroup. At this point, Nicole, the main building there, which if you were driving home this evening and saw all that black smoke coming up from this neighborhood, the main building is no longer on fire. Much of it burned, but that was creating much of the big plume of black smoke, which these people could see burning just north of the airport earlier. Maybe this was taken in the 5 o'clock hour shortly after ignition. But that fire's out. We're still seeing a lot of white and gray smoke from that scene as the debris and all kinds of things there continue to smolder.
It's been pretty intense, and we're super impressed by how Phoenix Fire was able to triage this step by step, dealing with the threat assessment of what they were looking at here. They knew immediately what they were dealing with, knowing that this was Bill's Propane. They're familiar with this building. They sent immediately the first engine from the airport and upped it to a hazmat call, knowing that there were propane tanks on property. And they've confirmed for us hundreds of propane tanks. You can hear them popping here. I'm going to let you listen in for a sec. That's a propane tank that ended up in a parking lot a few football fields away from the site of that fire. And look at that fireball. So they keep hearing these pops. This is one of the propane tanks that wound up in the gravel, hundreds of yards away from the actual fire. But as soon as they knew that they were dealing with this hazmat situation, they said they upped it. They called in all those other crews. They shut down the roads, and they brought in crews from other jurisdictions, shutting down the light rail, shutting down access to Gateway Community College, and working the threat assessment, understanding that in the heat of the day, 119 degrees out there, they were also dealing with natural gas that is super compressed, not just in those individual propane tanks that you're familiar with. Most households have them in the backyard at the barbecue grill, but also at least two larger, nearly 500-gallon propane tanks that are kind of used as a source to refill and refuel other propane tanks. Once they're empty, they bring them in. And so what they're dealing with now is what remains burning on property right now is those two big tanks. They've continued to put a ton of water on this. They've got 4 ladders up, I think, now, Jared?
Yeah, it's between 4 or 5. And, you know, you mentioned that when this started, they couldn't do a whole lot. You know, they couldn't get right there.
You have to keep a distance.
Oh, is this our chopper? Our chopper's allowed now over the scene. So this is our first. We're seeing it for the first time with you here live.
At least 5
streaming on OTT. And you can still see things are burning in there. There is still black smoke coming from the middle of this property. This is kind of a long established propane business here, just several blocks north of the airport. It's possible that those are vehicles in there on fire.
Looks like it, yeah.
Or who knows what. I mean, they've got a number of different delivery trucks that they use, it appears, as part of this business. But my goodness, yeah, they have at least 3 hose lines, up to 5 earlier on this fire, just continuing to douse it with water. Yeah, there's vehicles in the back of that property there. I can't see if they have burned or if they've been spared.
Definitely looks like there's damage.
Yeah, definitely
for
looks
sure.
like there's, some burnt structure there. And then it's kind of hard to make out through the mist of the smoke and all the water that they're dousing there. But yeah, in the center and left of your screen under that live bug that we've got the decal on your OTT screens right now, you can see some active flames out there still at this point. And you think about the ambient heat from that. That's what their big concern is, if there are any remaining propane tanks on property that are not those two large ones that they know about. But yeah, if there are any other propane tanks, I mean, we saw some still photographs from the internet from the business, and it kind of shows you some pictures of what it looks like. Typically, you're seeing just tank after tank after tank stacked, sometimes 3 high at least, it looked like. I mean, and several deep. So they said that they have, they can estimate hundreds of them that have been bottle rocket shot like missiles off the property. There's that photograph.
This is what it looked like before.
I know. And so, yeah, you can imagine propane tanks that are your typical residential. Then you also have commercial size propane tanks, which are considerably larger. So some of those ones also acting as fuel to this fire. And that's what they're dealing with at this point. But yeah, it is remarkable that there haven't been any reports of injuries. And I have to imagine that's, that was the biggest threat assessment they said when they triage a scene first. Harm to humans, and then also the possibility that it could spread to other structures and air quality as well.
Yeah, they said there is a gas line, excuse me, that goes into this property. So, excuse me, you have to think that gas line was quickly shut off as soon as property, because they have, as you've been talking about, plans to this place. Like, they know how it operates, they know where everything is on site.
Absolutely.
So just in case the worst case scenario happened, which happened today, they're prepared to fight it as best as possible.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating because the way first responders work, I mean, you've heard about them doing emergency drills, right?
Yeah.
So they go out to Luke Air Force Base or whatever, and they work with first responders in neighboring jurisdictions, and they say, like, if there were to be an emergent incident at this area, how would we respond best? So they already have like blueprints of properties with hazardous materials that have been registered with the fire department. They know where the threats are in their jurisdiction. So they're well aware of this property, they said, and they assured us that it is highly regulated. I asked specifically, is it regulated to the point where they have to have the air conditioning at a certain temperature to protect? But, you could see from that still photograph that we got off the internet that some of those propane tanks, just like you would in your backyard, are stored under, like, it looked like kind of a shed overhang, something along those lines. So those ones are not under any air conditioned protection or anything like that. But yeah, you can see the barbed wire fencing along there. It's well marked as a hazardous property. So yeah, it's still a big head scratcher as to what sparked the initial flame. But man, once that flame got to the first propane tank, that's what just started this catastrophic fire.
Out of control. We do have crews there. Sarah Robinson's standing by, and we've been talking about how these gas tanks kind of shot off through the neighborhood there. And
unbelievable.
Captain McDade sent you a photo. We've seen some other photos as well. Sarah, did you find one, or I'm told that you have one to show us?
Yeah, so if you can imagine hundreds of these guys exploding every second, that's what they were saying happened. You can see right where the pressure got to it and exploded right here. I'm going to tilt this towards you guys. These shot about 500 meters into the air. Super dangerous situation for the firefighters on scene. Miraculously, no one was injured. And these tanks, the small ones, these were the smallest of the bunch. There were also some pretty massive tanks that exploded along in this fire. This is a much different scene that we are seeing right now than what we even saw at the top of the hour. Minimal smoke coming from this propane service. When we first got here, it was a very massive fire. And we did get some videos, some viewer footage of these propane tanks exploding, and you can just hear them popping off every second. Miraculously, no injuries, though. We know there are at least 100 firefighters here, and they are swapping them out in 20-minute increments. That's because it is very hot here, still in the above 100 degrees, and the sun not down yet. So they're keeping safe. We have seen firefighters start to make their way onto the property, which we're told is a good sign. The PIO for Phoenix Fire just headed back towards the scene to get us an additional update, so hopefully we'll have that for you here shortly. But they are anticipating that this propane will burn off very quickly and that they should have the fire in control a little bit later tonight. So of course we'll keep you guys updated both on air and online. I'll send it back to you guys.
And Sarah, really quickly, that tank, the firefighters kind of cleared you to use that, right? It's not like you just went and found it yourself. I mean, they told you it was safe to handle. I just want to make that clear for folks.
Yes, this has been cleared for use, but really you can see the complete charring of this. This was once a white propane tank. This is completely black. It's charred, and it's still pretty hot. That's probably from the residual heat, not the explosion itself, but just from how hot it is here outside. But yes, hundreds of these being launched 500 meters into the air, happening every second. That's why this fire was so dangerous and so massive. And again, these were the smallest of the bunch.
That's the smallest of the bunch, and even still, she's struggling to physically pick it up. So imagine just the weight of that metal being shot off, propelled by that extreme pressurized gas. Once that hit that heat point of ignition, I mean, it just shot off, and that is super dangerous. Sarah, thank you for that visual. That's very effective. And here's one that's kind of crumpled in because it hit with such force. So hers, was still in the shape of what you might envision a propane tank. This one is just crumpled, potentially from the point of impact, hitting with such force. It's been pretty wild to see.
Yeah, no doubt. And, this is still 2 hours in. You have to wonder that in the hours to come, will we hear reports that, one of these came through a roof or hit a car?
It's
or
impossible
landed
to
in
know.
Someplace in a pool.
If they're
like
coming off at every, several a second, and you're dealing with hundreds of them, they're going to have to go through and kind of triage that neighborhood and that area and see what else the extent of the damages are that they're looking at. But thankfully at this point, no reports of any injuries, no reports of any secondary fires, though we know sometimes fires can smolder hours later, so they will be going through and kind of combing that area to make sure that those little fire bombs that became airborne because of the pressurized gas, that they didn't end up, in a shed that could then spark a smoldering fire hours down the road.
I mean, this was such a scary
Unexpected
situation. This video here from one of our viewers, taken right after the initial explosions. Look at the fuel.
Just trying to get a better vantage point of that. I'm squinting.
And that looks like one of the main tanks there.
Yeah, that's one of the big ones. Okay, and that's somebody who's driving by, and it's kind of like, a drive-by video roll that they're just trying to get a vantage point of that. But
and here's a live look at the progress they've made. I think Captain Scott Douglas is on the phone with us right now. Captain, if you can hear us, you're live on Arizona's Family. Where do things stand right now? Just visually from our perspective, it looks like you've made quite a bit of progress, but we do still see flame in there.
Yeah, absolutely. At this time, firefighters, we have a fourth alarm fire called to this scene with approximately 150 to 200 firefighters. Crews are still using elevated master streams surrounded this fire to make sure that they keep cooling all of the propane tanks as well as extinguishing the one structure that did catch on fire.
And as far as you know, no injuries from all this? That seems incredible.
Yeah, it is. We are very fortunate today. We did have hundreds of propane tanks that were exploding, shrapnel that was seen as far as 500 yards from the ground zero point of impact. So at this time, crews are doing a great job. We do have the area evacuated, isolated, and we are denying entry. We're great partnership with Phoenix PD, making sure that these streets are staying clear and safe, and we have evacuated a few of the homes in the immediate area. Otherwise, things seem to be going very smoothly. We anticipate this fire being out in the next 2 to 3 hours. We would advise everybody in the area of 40th Street and Van Buren as well as Washington area to not not driving this area due to traffic restrictions.
So talk to us about how your crews are holding up. We've been talking about them swapping out, making sure they're staying hydrated, getting fresh feet on the forward attack of the fire and everything like that. Are they dealing with heat exhaustion? How are they responding, and what are you seeing?
Absolutely. No, that's a great question. It's a great point. During these summer temperatures, we make sure that we add a layered response to a campaign fire like this, where we bring in multiple resources to make sure that our crews get enough work rest cycles to be able to put this fire out safely. So crews might work for 20 or 30 minutes, burn through a bottle of air, and then they're going to sit out for a little bit, get some water, get some fluids in them, get their vital signs checked, make sure that everything's in appropriate working order, and then they'll go back in while another crew takes their spot. So managing those work rest cycles is paramount in these extreme temperatures. But it's also not something new. We've been doing this for years, and we'll continue to do it as long as people keep calling 911.
Any secondary injuries from any of those firefighters?
No, at this time we haven't had anybody transported as of this point. Everybody's just making sure that they are drinking plenty of water. We do have paramedics on scene in the need where somebody would need an IV, something like that. But at this time, everybody has been able to stay safe, and the sun is starting to go down, so the temperatures are starting to drop a little bit. So that is to our advantage at this time.
We've seen firefighters be able now to walk onto this property. At what point were you able to determine the threat level was low enough to allow somebody to walk in there and take a look around? And what are they looking for right now in there?
So we do have specialists in hazardous materials on the scene. We have crews from the Phoenix Fire Investigations Task Force. All of these members are very highly trained, efficient in what they do. So they're going to evaluate this scene. They're going to do a size up and make sure that it's safe enough for our crews to enter. These propane tanks have been cooled to the point where they're not exploding anymore. So as the scene becomes more and more safe, that initial fire impact area, crews will be able to advance closer and closer, and the crews will be able to do their investigation as to the origin and cause of this fire.
You've talked about recovering, or at least putting eyes on, hundreds of those smaller propane tanks that have shot hundreds of yards outside of the property. Have your teams up in the ladders been able to give you an aerial confirmation that there are no other, there's not another cache of those propane tanks still remaining on the property?
Yeah, there is still quite a bit of smoke in the area. We do have crews in those elevated positions that are feeding us information. At this time, it looks like we don't have any other propane tanks that are burning. So it looks like all of those hazards have been mitigated, but we will continue to reevaluate and resize up this incident to make sure that we're consistently and constantly working in the safest manner. At this time, we do have a defensive posture on this fire, which means we're not actively going into the one structure that did catch. We're hitting it from exterior defensive positions to make sure that nobody gets hurt.
Well, this isn't really a residential area. It's mostly industrial, but there's the college across the street, different businesses, and some homes within several hundred yards. So is it possible that we'll hear of tanks hitting homes or landing in backyards? And if somebody finds one of these in a backyard, what are they supposed to do? Yeah, so there is a neighborhood community to the northeast of this location. I think that was a little far for any of the propane tanks to make it quite that far. Most of the propane tanks that we're seeing at this time are in the immediate parking lot at the college just to the west, and some of the parking lots in the neighboring businesses. So at this time we don't have any reports of anybody getting hit or hurt with any of these propane tanks. So I think we're in the clear there. If anybody sees them, I would just advise them to leave them alone just to make sure that there's no other hazards involved with those tanks.
That being said, you guys have stressed, stay shelter in place, stay inside. You don't want to be out wandering around. I know this is fascinating to see, but watch it on our news app or on azfamily.com. Do not be wandering the streets trying to look for these by any means. So I understand that obviously your number one priority is the property at this point, and those larger 500 potentially gallons tanks, and trying to keep those as cool as possible as that bleeds out. But then from there, once that gets, contained or controlled, if you will, I'm going to use air quotes because that's still pretty volatile. Are you working with your other partners in different jurisdictions or police officers to kind of go through that that neighborhood or those surrounding streets to either recover or assure that none of those other smaller propane tanks may have, I threw out the hypothetical, landed in a shed and could smolder a secondary fire hours later?
Sure. So we're going to make sure we do a good perimeter search around this incident to make sure that we don't have any other spot fires that are going to start up around here. We're also going to work with all of our stakeholders in the area. We have Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, we have the light rail, we have city streets, water department, Phoenix PD. All of these stakeholders we're working with closely to make sure that each agency is doing their job to the fullest extent to make sure that the community is safe.
And we're looking at live pictures from our helicopter right now. The camera's kind of zoomed out, and I can see what I believe is the Animal Welfare League campus, which is just south of this property. That's fine, or were animals evacuated? I've heard kind of mixed reports on what precautions they took there.
Yeah, when we came on scene, we did evacuate the Arizona Animal Welfare League, made sure that those animals were taken from that structure, and any of the neighboring businesses as well. We encouraged everybody that was in the path of the smoke to stay indoors, not be outside in the heat, and stay away from those toxic fumes.
Did I hear you right? Did you say make sure the animals were removed from the structure?
That's what the initial reports that I received. I haven't been in the business myself yet.
Okay.
I've been doing a perimeter search up on this north side, making sure that I've been able to touch base with all of these other fire crews. But at this time, the initial reports that I got were that the Arizona Animal Welfare League was evacuated.
It's a lot to juggle, so we appreciate your, kind of giving us a play-by-play of everything that you're learning as you're learning it, and we really appreciate that. I was just figuring, man, that's a lot of animals to try and relocate, but this is a pretty intense fire. Have you ever been on anything this size, this volatile, with a risk to your fire crews?
Yeah, we deal with structure fires like this, unfortunately, more frequently than we would like. We do work with our strategic partners very well, the outside agencies, Tempe Fire, Phoenix PD, we have Guadalupe Fire, all of us train together to make sure that when we do have these large campaign fires, that they are able to go out without any significant impact to the community. We extinguish them quickly and safely and effectively. And at this time, I think this fire should be wrapping up here in the next couple hours.
And just to confirm, we heard earlier there's a gas line that pumps right into this property. Was step number one trying to get that shut off? Is that how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're going to want to make sure that any feeder lines are secured. They're going to want to make sure that if any of these propane tanks, there's some larger ones on the scene, that they were bleeding off the fuel. They're going to cool the tanks. The tactic involved is to make sure that those tanks don't overheat and then have a levee incident, which is where those tanks would explode. So the primary tactic was cooling the tanks, making sure that any feeder lines were secured, and then extinguishing any spot fires.
Okay, Captain Scott Douglas with Phoenix Fire, thank you so much. And I mean, we're so impressed by the job you guys are doing. Yeah, you guys stay safe out there. We so appreciate the job that you're doing to kind of contain and control this fire. Explosive from the get-go. They were able to, kind of, I think, first order of business, make sure no one got close to those rockets of propane tanks just blasting from the property. Who would expect to see something like that? When you see a fire, you get looky-loos. We know this in the news business. People are curious by nature. They want to get the best shots, put it on social media and whatnot. So, let's go out and take a look at this down the street. Who would ever anticipate the possibility of giant propane tanks being shot 500 yards through the sky?
Yeah. I mean, we've covered a lot of these fires.
I've never seen anything like that for me.
Heard anything like that?
No.
It's interesting as the sun kind of dips lower and casts shadows over this property. You could see, the flames stand out more.
Yeah.
So you could see the parts of it which are still burning. And because there's so much smoke there in that area, it is still difficult to tell what exactly burned. We know at least one building burned. We know a number of the tanks burned. And it looks like there are cars, and I don't know if there's a fence between this property and the adjacent lot, But at least it looks like at least some vehicles must have burned in this.
Yeah, it's really hard to tell in the foreground what you're looking at there because it's just like charred crisp at this point. But the flames are significantly smaller than what we were seeing earlier. And again, they said that they've got their fire investigators who are supremely trained in this. Phoenix Fire is known, truly, I said nationwide, but worldwide, as one of the best in the industry. They train other departments on how to handle fire investigations and structure fires, urban fires. And so they're out there right now. They were able to assess, they said they use their teams in the ladders as kind of an aerial eye to then rally back to them and explain, hey, here's what I'm seeing from my vantage point, and that's very interesting that they're able to do that. We got our chopper over the scene and giving us that perspective, that aerial perspective really does help. But for them, they were able to say, okay, now it's safe enough for us. Yeah. We've got the water on these two sources of the main fires at this point. And again, it's those two larger tanks you can see to the right and to the left where the water's coming from the ladders down on those. But the flame itself is not as intense as what we saw before.
It's just pretty consistent.
Yeah,
just
and
pretty
they said
consistent
this is
as
what we
it
expect.
burns off the fuel.
This is
there.
what we expect
it's
at that point.
As close to controlled as you would expect at a scene like this. Yeah, and the firefighters that we've seen walking onto this property were in a different area, he said, because they're still treating this in a defensive way, meaning they're not walking right up to it with their hoses. They're still just spraying it from a distance from the ladders there. So the investigators who've arrived there on scene are not right on top of that burning area right now. They're in kind of a safer spot there. But on the bottom of your screen, you could see this is where like a lot of the parking lots are for Sky Harbor Airport, for off-airport parking. It's right along 40th Street. All the parking lots are right there. Gateway Community College is right across the street. The Animal Welfare League is next door. And we have calls into them to see kind of how they're doing. Luckily, the flames did not spread to that campus. That's a large building. They have a big outdoor area with like kind of a big tent area. Yeah. So thankfully, the embers didn't land on that tent area or ignite anything on the Animal Welfare League property. It also looks like they have a fire truck down there sort of helping keep the flames away from the Animal Welfare League. But if indeed they had to evacuate the animals there, that's a big question. Where have they gone for the night? Because they're not letting people back in there.
That's not an easy job to do. I mean,
they're shelter pets.
My goodness.
They've got so many in there who they deal with all the time. And look at this, Nicole. Look at that. That's one of the big trucks, which appears to have been...
have a tank on the backside of it, right?
And look at that pile. Look at that pile of propane tanks.
I can't even believe that.
They were talking about how it's been hundreds of tanks, and that's literally hundreds of tanks we are looking at right there. And look, there are some more of the large tanks.
Yeah,
maybe the feeder tanks.
Okay, so some of them, obviously, it's just so weird because you look at them and they look like little chiclets. It's hard to get a perspective of the size and scope of what you're dealing with here, but they're just like burnt and laying down on the ground there. So did they explode vertically and then just boom, land back down? They're totally spent, and it's just basically like charred metal, a little charred metal graveyard of these propane tanks that were exploding. When he was giving us this last update in the last 15 minutes, I was surprised to hear that it was bumped up to a 4 alarm.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I'm not surprised because it is one of the biggest fires that we've seen, structure fires and hazmat fires in some time.
In the heat as well.
In this heat, which is insane, but based on the timing, I'm now figuring that we're into our 8th swap out of crews where they're, kind of cooling down. And what I found interesting also is he was talking about, I did a training as a journalist they did like a media training for Phoenix Fire. And so I went through that. It was a week-long class. And those SCBAs, that's you put it on your face and you breathe through. It's not an easy thing to do. Look at this burnt out structure.
And you do see a couple firefighters there close to that side of the building.
And he said that the air in those tanks only lasts 30 minutes. So that's kind of a reminder for them. I'll tell you what, their adrenaline is so amped up right now. Any first responder, it's hard to pull them off of a scene like this. They want to be there in the action. They want to be able, this is, kind of what they train for all the time. It's what they live for. Me, you, we'd be running from something like this, but they live for this. They're well trained. So at least that is one other reinforcement that, hey, it's time for you to swap out for your safety. And, like he said, it's a well-oiled machine. They train this way, and they know when they're dealing with this heat that that's a first priority, making sure that they are well enough and strong enough to continue, because it's a duration. This is a long firefight.
And almost 200 of them there this evening from across the valley.
Right.
Royal, did you see when the chopper was showing us all of those tanks? That was our first clear shot from above of all the tanks on the side of the building. I mean, my goodness, they were describing it to us, but we couldn't see through the thick smoke earlier. But we were just able to see that huge pile of propane tanks still on site.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think the other amazing shot that we just recently got from the helicopter is all the cars.
Yeah.
And I know you guys were talking about that, but I was watching out of the newsroom. All the cars that got damaged from this fire is just incredible as well. As you know, weather wasn't much of a factor, but we've learned a lot about propane in the last couple of hours. And one of the things about propane that'll be interesting to find out as this investigation continues how this fire may have started is propane is heavier than air. So if, say, there was a leak somewhere out on the site, that propane would tend to stay near the ground in an area, where it possibly could ignite. That's the opposite of natural gas. Natural gas is lighter than air. So when natural gas leaks, it generally speaking goes up into the atmosphere. So that's one of the, if you will, the downsides of propane. But the other thing we've learned about propane, we all know this, it's super, super safe. There are very few accidents around the country, even with all the backyard barbecues, that in terms of the relative use of propane. And the other thing is the explosiveness was something we didn't know about, that propane can burn up to 3,500 degrees. And so, that's another reason these canisters just got lobbed out of this site like cannonballs as this fire progressed today. Other thing we've been checking for you is air quality. The air quality in and around the site initially, within a few blocks, because you've got that heavy smoke and whatnot, you can never rule out some issues. And if you ever see any of that heavy smoke or smell it in your neighborhood like something is burning, well, just get inside because that's the safe thing to do. We don't have air quality monitors on every block. We do have a lot of air quality monitors out there, and we're checking ADEQ, and one that's downwind in South Scottsdale from this site is still reporting good air quality. The particulate levels, which is the smoke, we've done that with the fires from the smoke that we've had in Arizona and in California and back east from the wildfires in Canada, and it's the same thing. It's smoke, it's particulates, and the particulate levels are still in the good range. They're low. So the one thing we can say is that the air quality is it's not great. Again, not right near the site. You saw the firefighters with their air masks on. They're prepared for everything, but after you get a few blocks off of the site, not too bad. And the other reason for that is that the wind has come up a little bit this evening. It's out of the southwest. There is a temperature gauge, a weather station at Gateway Community College just across the street. And the current wind is out of the southwest at 12. We had a wind gust of 15 in the last hour or so. And it's still, let me just double check this temperature because I don't think the temperature is coming down too much. Oh, it's 113 degrees. So firefighters are still dealing as we approach sunset with temperatures of 113 degrees out there. So it's going to be quite a long night, one could imagine.
It's just brutal out there still for them, Royal. Look at that. And oh my gosh, I think it's safe to say dozens of cars and trucks are toast.
Absolutely.
And, from the angle, I can't tell if they were just parked at that propane business or if they're part of the airport parking lots or what. But that is just row after row totally charred as a result of this fire.
Super helpful to get these aerial vantage points coming in there. And yeah, you can see, cars, trucks, SUVs, vans, and they're doing what they can to cool this down. But whatever that structure was, it's just reduced to nothing. But then, all those cars row after row of them,
and it's
charred
just
to a crisp.
Yeah, this new perspective that we didn't have when the fire was going. The crazy thing about this business, as you guys know, because you've been on Google Maps, well, we all have been, is that this is a relatively small business site. It's not a huge site, but boy, oh boy, the fire today was just amazing. Still continuing to burn. And you know, my question, if I was able to ask a firefighter right now, is because remember, right at the start of this, Captain McDade told us that can't put out a propane fire, we got to surround and drown it. And I wonder how long it takes to drown it before firefighters are going to be absolutely, you know, convinced that they won't have to worry about this fire. So that's one of the questions I'd love to ask a firefighter right now.
We do know they'll be on scene for several more hours. We are going to continue to provide you live pictures here from our crews on the ground, from our news chopper up above, as well as fire crews. Up to 200 firefighters from across the valley remain here, putting out what is left of this fire at this propane business just north of Sky Harbor.
We've got our chopper on the scene. We've got reporters out there on scene as well, talking with folks in the area, and viewer video, just trying to bring you the very best images of the scene and figuring out what's going on out here. But again, they said they're taking a defensive stance. They're going to, once they get this fire contained and controlled, they will then kind of move out, do a perimeter search later to assess, you know, that no other spot fires, secondary fires crop up in this industrial neighborhood. But stay with Arizona's Family as we continue these aerial images of this propane fire.